All right, hi y'all. Nick here. I'm a little bit late on getting this video out because my screen recording platform that I use to make these videos required me to upgrade, so I had to get the company card and all that stuff. So I want to apologize for being a little bit late on getting this video out. I'm excited to get started into the learning. At this point, you should have already watched Eric Erickson's 8 stages of development video. That's just a YouTube video. I did not make that video, but you should have watched that one in advance of this one. And we're going to get into a different psychologist named Jean Piaget today. And just as a quick, I guess, update or reminder, I said this in the intro video for the week, but the reason we're studying developmental psychology to start this off is not because I necessarily believe that these 1930s and 40s psychological theories are necessarily what we use in learning every day, but they're theories that kind of shaped the landscape. And I want us to approach them with a healthy skepticism and not just blindly accept everything. But really, I think it's important that we realize that like the landscape of learning has changed over the years because of some of these thoughts. So probably Piaget is probably the second most influential psychologist on learning theory. The most influential will be who we talk about next week, which is Lev Vygotsky. But Piaget is probably the second most influential researcher, and I want to get into it. So I want to get started. Jean Piaget is who we're studying. He's a Swiss psychologist, and he was born in 1896. You should be filling out notes as I fill out notes. There's a copy of these notes in Moodle, and that will be an assignment that you actually complete. But taking these notes along with me, it's worth 10 points. So make sure you're doing that. And he died in 1980. Okay, so he actually didn't. He I know that it's not that recent. It's 44 years, but 1980 is somewhat recent, really. So he lived 84 years. But most of the main work that he did that is really, really still pulled upon was in the 1920s and 30s. So he was around 24 years old when his work started to kind of be really take shape. However, he didn't actually get appreciated like he was publishing this work in the 1920s and 30s. People didn't really care about it until the 1960s. Okay, so he was rediscovered. He did all of this foundational work that people kind of just tossed off and said we don't care. And then in the 1960s, some folks like B.F. Skinner and a few others were like, whoa, actually, this is how people learn. This is really interesting. So anyway, what did they rediscover is what we're going to cover. What we're going to cover today. What were the theories and the thoughts that Piaget was invested in and interested in? Well, to put it very shortly, Piaget is the founder of cognitive development theory. Okay, cognitive development theory, right? He viewed learning as a primarily mental, a mental process, and he believed that if we can focus on the mental and intellectual capacities of people, they would learn, right? So that learning takes place when we're expanding the brain. We're making the mind learn. We're doing synaptic connection. We are learning in such a way that the neurons are connecting to new neurons and creating pathways. So cognitive development is what he really got into. Very biology based, right? This is a quite biological view of learning, where he's saying we learn because our brains physically grow. So a lot of times we're going to use these ideas in terms of interchangeably with intellectual development or brain development, right? So the brain can grow and develop through natural means and personal means, right? Every person can, our brain will develop by the time we're 25 years old, just naturally, but there are ways to shape and mold it along the way up until the point of death, really. And that is how we learn, is shaping the brain. Yeah, this is actually really, really controversial, though. And I know that sounds kind of absurd that this would have been controversial, but people didn't really believe in. When I say people, I don't mean the average person, but you have to remember Charles Darwin and evolutionary psychology and Sigmund Freud were really the late 1800s had kind of taken over. And in the debate of nature versus nurture, people were firmly planting on the genetic side and saying that your ability to be smart was genetic. So people believed that a person was cognitively predisposed, right? This is the term we're going to use. It doesn't necessarily mean a predetermined, but cognitively predisposed. In other words, if your parents were not smart, you could not be smart. If you came from a family of blacksmiths, you really ought to just keep being a blacksmith. There's no advancement in your brain and your intellectual capacity. You were a product of your genetics, right? That came from this Darwinistic style of thinking, right? So they said that cognitive development was linked to physical development only. Our brain would grow as it would grow. Regardless of what we thought about, regardless of what we did in school, the brain would grow as it would grow, and kids were viewed, in a sense, as miniature adults or versions of their parents, right? Small versions of their parents. Kids were products of their genetics, not their nurture, right? So nature would be what we call that. Kids were products of nature, not nurture. The thinking capacities, and they should therefore they were just kind of viewed as little adults and held to the same developmental standard as adults. They often should know better, right? If they came from a good family or if they came from a poor family, it's just they're delayed, they're incapable. So if someone is not good at school, it wasn't something to get better at. It was delayed. They're delayed or incapable of learning. I know this sounds so old school, but if you're someone who holds a very, very strict evolutionary way of thinking, it really is this conclusion makes sense. If you're someone who is hyper evolutionary and you believe that genetics are what lead to the survival of the fittest sort of mindset, and that's our brain is going to be shaped by those genetic factors more than our environmental factors. This makes sense. It's obviously I disagree with it personally, and Piaget disagreed with it personally, but that was the main line of thinking in the psychology world. Okay, so how did Piaget start ripping down this way of thinking that kids were just predisposed and they were just going to be who they're going to be? They're going to be just like their parents. What did he do? Well, he kind of piggybacked off of Erik Erikson, who you've already watched a video on. And Erik Erikson said, hey, listen up. Between the ages of 0 and death, people go through these crises and these stages. And if we can help them along the way, they'll develop some virtues. And they're not going to just be the product of their birth. They can be the product of their environment. That was revolutionary. And Piaget said, not only do I want to look at 0 to 90 or 0 to death, he wanted to really look at the early stages of people's lives. And he focuses most of his work on the ages of human development of 0 to 12, 0 to 14, in that range. What we would call birth to adolescence. because he kept noticing that people were very, very flexible during the ages of 0 to 12. That kids could, very interestingly, learn faster as a 5-year-old than they could as a 50-year-old. And he started noticing this, and he said, okay, I believe that pre-adolescence is a major time in cognitive development, and I want to focus a lot of research and time and energy on understanding pre-adolescence. So he, just like Erickson, had some stages that he developed. 0 to 2, he said if a kid is 0 to 2 years old, they're in like this sensory motor stage. Okay? Let's break that word down. Senses and motor. So it's understanding the world through the 5 senses and moving through the world. Right? A kid who's 0 to 2 is learning through their senses and through their interaction with the environment what the world looks like. So the senses and movement are the only means through which a baby or toddler can process the world. Okay? That means, in other words, they're not really thinking. 0 to 2-year-olds are not really thinking. There's not thought processes that is occurring in our 1-year-olds. Okay, so the senses and movement, not thought, are how people experience the world between the ages of 0 and 2. So within that, he coined the terms motor skills, and he said there's fine and gross motor skills. A fine motor skill, and I'm just going to add this real quickly. A fine motor skill would be the skill of manipulating small items, right? Small items. It includes holding things, grabbing things. It would also eventually, as students get a little, or kids get a little bit older, it would include throwing, catching, the ability to use one's hands in a productive way. Okay, that is what fine motor skills is. Versus gross motor skills, Piaget said gross motor skills are the ability to move efficiently and quickly and purposefully. Okay. Now, those are my words, not his, but the ability to move oneself throughout the world and not just crawl or not just, not just sit on the carpet and play, but to be able to actually move places. That's gross motor skills. So it included things like running and jumping and things like skipping later on, right? We typically learn to walk and run before we learn to skip, but there's this progression of gross motor skills as well. Okay? So that's what kids between the ages of 0 and 2 are doing. They're just learning to process the world through their senses, and they're learning movement. So that is the main goal within the sensory motor stage of cognitive development. All right, the next stage of cognitive development, according to Piaget, would be between the ages of 2 and 7. He has what's called the pre-operational stage. And this is a stage in which kids begin to think, and they take in information verbally. The primary way in which they take in information is verbal, but they're also learning reading, okay, as well as expression, right? So they're talking and listening, reading and writing, and expressing, right? That would be singing, dancing, drawing, coloring, right? So they still do not have what we would call abstract thought or what we might call logical sequencing in their thought. But they do have the ability to take in information, process information, right? Primarily through listening, reading, writing, and so forth. These are our main ways, and expression through art and whatnot, okay? So again, pre-operational thinking is, it's not going to be thinking about these deep questions in the world. Like this, a 5-year-old is not going to be contemplating his or her existence. A 5-year-old is going to be expressing him or herself through play and through listening and talking. We get these rule following and ability to follow rules and be obedient and ability to make decisions for oneself, but it's not like a purposeful, like I understand the reason for human existence kind of level of thinking yet. Okay, so that's pre-operational. All right, we have two more. The next stage is between the ages of 7 and 12, and this is what we call concrete operational. Okay, the concrete operational stage is about the time a kid is in second grade through middle school. Okay, between second grade and middle school, kids begin to think concretely or logically, but they're still struggling with the abstract and theoretical concepts. Okay, so kids at this point are going to be able to do math problems well and read pretty well, right? You can teach kids to read at this age, complete math problems. We can have kids at this point understand cause and effect, right? We have kids, oh, I didn't even see that. I was writing that. I'm just speaking and I saw notes for it. We can teach kids to solve problems on their own. This includes social problems, right? This is when you start to reason with kids and say, hey, I know you got in a fight because they took your toy, but what would be a better way rather than fighting to get your toy back? Maybe you could ask them, you could talk to them, and you begin to teach kids how to solve problems in social settings and academic settings and in a lot of other settings as well. So the concrete operational stage is often viewed as the most foundational stage for academic success. Okay. In other words, if a kid has a really good second through sixth grade education, they typically are the ones that are going to be set up most effectively to do school well. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't be a deep thinker. That doesn't mean they can't be great with their, working with their hands or building things. But when we talk about, the professors or doctors or lawyers who have to do tons of school, the concrete operational stage is the stage in which students really get geared up for school work. Okay. Again, I never want anyone to think, oh, well, the student isn't great at concrete thought, but they're really deep thinkers, or oh, they're so good with their hands, right? That is not to say this is the only type of intelligence out there. There's other types of intelligence, which we'll get into in this class. But all right, last stage, and this is ages 12 and up. We really ought to not say 12 and up. This is adolescence and up. This is when a kid is kind of going through puberty and then beginning to really develop mentally in a sense that they are becoming more like an adult than a kid. This is called our formal operational stage. Okay, formal operational stage. And the formal operation stage means a kid is capable of logical thought as well as theoretical thought, as well as abstract reasoning, as well as deductive reasoning. Okay, this is where kids begin to have the mental faculties to think through the purpose for existence. This is where kids have the ability to think through the reasons why. Hey, I don't want you to take Jimmy's toy. Why? Well, let's talk about that, right? It's where values start to get to play. This is where certain things like theme and symbolism start to matter. It can cause kids to think in a deeper way finally, and they start to question the whys behind things. And they might begin to even wonder, why are things the way that they are? Right? That becomes a question in the formal operational stage that a 5-year-old probably isn't thinking about. A 10-year-old might be getting closer to thinking about, but by the time a kid's an 8th grader, high schooler, why are things the way they are? This is where we start to see students have some ability to self-regulate their own learning if taught properly. And the door is essentially open for them to care about what they're learning and to go, I want to learn math so that I can be an engineer, so that I can keep people safe when they drive or in buildings. Or I want to learn science because I'm going to be a doctor and I want to help people live. Or I want to be a therapist. Or I want to, right? This is the age in which kids can actually think through things. You ask a kid in the pre-operational stage, what do you want to be when they grow up? They're going to say, I want to be the president. And, every 4 years, someone can be the president, but in general, not all kids between the ages of 2 and 7 can be president. They're not thinking in that logical way, right? Versus these formal operational students, they're thinking logically, they're thinking theoretically, they're reasoning, they're having deductions, okay? So these are the 4 stages of cognitive development according to Piaget. And these have had a huge impact on education and learning. You probably would pick this information up just from thinking about this for a bit. If you were to just use that abstract and deductive thinking faculty that you all have, given that you're in the formal operational stage, you would be able to kind of come to some of these conclusions, right? So the very first thing is that we need education to be appropriate to development. That means math has to come a little bit later. You're not going to teach your 3-year-old math, but reading can come a little bit earlier. Again, kids can learn to read as soon as the pre-operational stage, versus math, they really can only get math once they're concrete operational. You know, in earlier stages, a hands-on modality of learning is so key. Remember, the earlier stages really are world exploration and expression exploration. That's what the early stages are really about. And so having rich opportunities for kids to be able to play well, to do art, to sing, to dance, those are so important according to Piaget, and I agree with it. I don't think we need to lock our 7-year-olds into classrooms and say, now become a deep thinker. It's not possible, okay? So having a big emphasis on learning to do things with your hands and to express yourself is key. And then later on, around that adolescent period of life, that's when you can get the more theoretical, complex topics and readings, okay? Next thing that you might be able to pull out is Piaget also, and I didn't write this earlier, while he came up with these stages, he was not delusional in saying that these ages, like magically on someone's 8th birthday, they become this stage. Magically at 12 years old, they become this stage. He says at every these stages are guides but not rules. And every kid is going to be in a different place. Therefore, we must be assessing students. That was radical thought, by the way. To assess a student and meet them where they were, that was really, really radical. So then that led to things like pre-tests, diagnostics. It led to the ideas of formative and summative assessment within school, practicing for tests and then testing, right? He was one of the main people that said we need to teach students, not subjects. Again, this was not really valued in the 40s or 50s, but around the 60s, that became a common thing to say. We teach students, not subjects. And then, of course, a big thing that Piaget really, really emphasized was that, especially in the early years, we need active learning. We need discovery. We need opportunities to do object manipulation for those gross motor skills and fine motor skills. We need hands-on learning. Up until that point, memorization was viewed as this hallmark practice of learning. And Piaget first said, yeah, you can memorize stuff, but it's really probably not quite as beneficial as play. So that's kind of cool. Obviously, it sounds really nice. There's parts of this I disagree with. There's parts that I do agree with. Piaget is definitely a rose-colored glasses kind of researcher, and people look at his work because they like what he has to say. They like his theories because they're very convenient. Let your kids play more and wait to teach them math. I mean, that leads to, a very convenient type of education and parenthood. And we could debate if how much play is good play, how much lack of school should be taking place in the name of object manipulation. Do kids need to learn to read younger? That's a big question. All of these questions come to mind. So I agree with a lot of this, but I don't agree with everything. Again, I promote healthy skepticism across the board. Okay, hopefully you finished your note sheet and turn that note sheet in for 10 points. And that is Jean Piaget. There's a lot more to Piaget, but that's kind of an introduction to his work. All right, y'all. Cheers. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye.